The first gunshot cracked through the Friday night lights just as 17-year-old Eli Mercer stepped out from beneath the bleachers with a blood-smeared phone in his hand and somebody else's name on his lips. For half a second, the whole field held still, like the town of Bellhaven had forgotten how to breathe. Then the marching band broke apart. Parents started screaming, and Sheriff Nora Weller saw a man in a dark work jacket shove through the west gate and disappear into the traffic beyond the stadium. By the time she reached the track, Eli was on his knees beside assistant football coach Danny Pike, who lay twisted against the chain-link fence with his chest pumping out dark blood into the painted lane markers. He said he had to tell somebody, Eli kept saying. Voice shredded raw, not even looking at Nora, just staring at Danny like he could will him back upright. He said if I didn't answer he was going to take it to the sheriff. He said tonight. He said tonight. Nora dropped beside the dying man, pressed both hands over the wound, and shouted for EMS. But Danny's eyes were already losing their focus. He looked past her shoulder toward the bleachers, toward the Baptist church sign lit up beyond the parking lot, and with what little air he had left, he whispered, "It wasn't the bridge. It was the boy," before his body went slack under her hands. 20 minutes later, the field was floodlit by state police units, the game canceled, and Bellhaven had become the kind of town that would spend the next 10 years pretending this was the first bad thing that had ever happened here. Nora stood behind the yellow tape with blood drying on her wrists, while her younger brother Cal Mercer pushed through a crowd of parents to get to his son. Cal looked older than his 46 years, drywall dust still in the seams of his knuckles, his face gray with fear. Eli went straight into his father's arms and said, "Dad, I swear I didn't do anything," which made half the people within earshot turn toward them in the ugly, hungry way people do when a story has finally given them a villain-shaped hole to fill. Nora saw the shift happen in real time. Danny Pike was dead. Eli had been alone with him, and Bellhaven already wanted its answer. "Nobody says another word to him," Nora snapped, stepping in before deputies could close around the boy. "He's a witness." "Maybe," said Deputy Reese Harmon, low enough that most folks couldn't hear. But Nora did. Reese had been with the department 12 years and still wore suspicion like it was a badge higher than hers. He was holding the phone. Nora took the phone from Eli with a gloved hand. The screen was spiderwebbed, the lock screen still glowing with 6 missed calls from Danny Pike and 1 text preview that read, "I can't carry this alone anymore." Cal looked from the phone to Nora's face, reading her before she said a word, and in that instant, the old family tension came back like it had never left. He had spent half his life thinking his sister trusted procedure more than blood, and she had spent half hers proving she didn't. "Nora," he said quietly, not a plea exactly, but a warning. She ignored it. "Get Eli to the station. He's not under arrest. I want counsel offered, and I want every second recorded." Eli pulled back from his father. "I didn't kill Coach Pike." "I know what you said," Nora told him. It was the truth, but not all of it. She did not know what to believe yet. She knew only that Danny Pike had been trying to tell somebody something, and now he was dead before he could finish it. She also knew Danny had spent the last 3 months calling her office about county permits tied to the old Rainer Bridge redevelopment, then hanging up whenever she tried to pin him down. The bridge had been closed since a structural collapse 2 years earlier sent 1 car into the creek and killed a local teenager named Mason Vick. Officially, it was an accident caused by storm damage and deferred maintenance. Unofficially, Bellhaven had split into camps, those who blamed the county, those who blamed the contractor, and those who thought somebody had covered up a warning to save money. Danny Pike had not been involved in county government, but he had played high school ball with County Commissioner Grant Holloway, and men who grow up together in small towns tend to carry each other's sins longer than they carry each other's friendships. At the station, Eli sat in interview room 2 with a paper cup trembling between his hands, while Cal paced the hallway and called his ex-wife 3 states away. Nora watched through the glass, remembering Eli at 8 years old with skinned knees and a plastic badge she had given him at the county fair, saying he wanted to be brave like Aunt Nora. The memory landed hard enough to make her angry. Brave was a word people used when they wanted to make duty sound clean. She went in, sat across from him, and kept her voice level. "Start from the beginning." Eli swallowed. "Coach texted me after halftime, said to meet him under the bleachers. Said it was about Mason." That made Nora still. "Mason Vick?" "Yeah." Eli rubbed his eyes. "I told him I didn't know anything about Mason, and he wrote back, 'You know more than you think.' Did you?" "No." The answer came fast, but fear can make innocence sound rehearsed. "He was acting weird all week. He asked if my dad had kept any old job files from the bridge site. Asked if I'd ever seen my uncle's truck by the creek at night." "Your uncle?" Eli hesitated. "Darren, Cal's older brother." Nora shut her notebook for a second and leaned back. Darren Mercer had been dead 14 months, overdose in a motel outside Knoxville, leaving behind debts, a burnt-out truck, and a reputation Bellhaven was always happy to attach to anything rotten. He had worked for Holloway Construction on and off, including the summer before the bridge collapse. "What happened under the bleachers?" she asked. Coach was waiting there. He looked scared. Like really scared. He had this folder and he kept saying he'd made a mistake, that he thought it was just paperwork. But a boy died, and then another life was going to get ruined, and he couldn't take church on Sunday one more time with all these people praying like they were clean. Eli's face tightened. "I thought he was drunk or something. Then he asked me if my dad knew Darren had hidden things in the Mercer garage before he died. I said I didn't know what he meant. Coach grabbed my arm and told me if anything happened to him, I needed to make sure the sheriff saw the folder. Then someone yelled from outside. Coach turned, and the shot came through the fence. You see who yelled? No. I heard boots running after. I picked up the folder, but it wasn't there anymore. Just the phone." Nora stared at him. "You're sure there was a folder?" Yes. She believed him then. Not because he sounded convincing, but because he sounded offended by the question, in exactly the way innocent kids do when they realize adults can't protect them from suspicion. Outside the room, Cal was waiting with his jaw clenched. "You're digging around Darren now?" he said, as soon as Nora stepped out. "My son gets dragged into a murder and you're asking about my dead brother?" Danny was asking about him first. Danny Pike drank himself mean every other weekend and chased secrets to feel important. He got shot before he could hand over something that's common as us. Missing. Cal stepped closer. "Then go find who shot him. Don't hang Darren around my kid's neck because it's easy," Nora almost said. Easy was never a Mercer family word, but bit it back. Their father had taught all three siblings the same lesson in different forms. Protect the family first. Tell the truth later if there's room. Nora had spent 20 years trying to unlearn it. Cal had not. She drove out to the Mercer house just before midnight. The place sat on the edge of town, where subdivisions gave up and pine woods took over. A single-story ranch with a sagging back porch, and 2 generations of patched mistakes in the siding. Cal's daughter, Maddie, a nurse at County Hospital, met Nora at the door in scrub pants and a college sweatshirt, her hair tied back, her face pale from hearing too much, too fast. "Dad's in the garage," she said. "He's pissed. That makes 2 of us." Maddie didn't smile. In the garage, Cal was standing under the bare bulb with old shelving units emptied onto the concrete floor. Tax records, contractor receipts, rusted fishing gear, a busted nail gun, Darren's leftover tools. "You got a warrant?" he asked without turning. "You want me to go get one?" He laughed once, bitter. "That's always been your problem. You hear challenge before you hear blood. Blood doesn't clear a crime scene." "No, but it ought to buy my son the benefit of the doubt." Nora softened her tone even though every instinct told her not to. "Cal," Danny Pike named the bridge with his last words. "Eli says Danny connected it to Darren. If there's something here and we don't find it tonight, whoever killed Danny may come back for it." That finally reached him. He scrubbed a hand over his mouth and pointed toward the back wall. Darren had a locker chest he kept padlocked. "After he died, I couldn't get it open. Told myself I didn't care what was in it." They found the chest behind paint cans and a deer feeder. Cal brought a pry bar. The metal shrieked as it gave. Inside was a mess of old union cards, cigarette packs, and beneath them, a water-stained envelope containing photocopied inspection reports, payroll sheets, and a flash drive taped to the back with black electrical tape. Nora felt the temperature in the garage change. Cal saw it too. "Tell me that's not what I think it is. I don't know what you think it is." But she did. The inspection reports bore signatures from county engineers dated 2 weeks before the bridge collapse, and one page had red pen notes indicating a support crack severe enough to require immediate closure. The official county file had never included that page. The payroll sheets tied several undocumented cash payments to temporary laborers, including Darren Mercer and another name Nora knew too well. Mason Vick, age 17, listed under site cleanup subcontracting 3 nights before his death. Mason had never been officially employed there. In the public story, he was just driving home in the storm when the bridge failed. "Jesus," Cal whispered. "He was on that site." Nora pocketed the flash drive. "Nobody else touches anything." Maddie had followed them in and now stood frozen at the workbench. "If Mason was working there," she said, "then somebody lied to his mother for 2 years. Bellhaven was built on lies polite enough to get invited to fundraisers." Nora knew that. What she had not expected was the next lie to arrive before dawn. At 3:12 a.m., dispatch called her to County Hospital. Grant Holloway's chief of staff had come in after a single-car accident on Route 8, disoriented and bleeding, saying he needed to talk to the sheriff alone. By the time Nora reached the ER bay, the man Todd Garrison, 40, church deacon, campaign fixer, smiling face at every rotary pancake breakfast in the county, was fighting through pain meds and panic hard enough to sweat through the blanket. "They know about Pike," he muttered when Nora drew the curtain. "They know he went outside the circle." "Who's they?" "Don't do that sheriff thing with me. You know who runs this county." Nora kept her expression flat. "Commissioner Holloway?" Todd gave her a look that was almost pity. "Grant doesn't run it. Grant fronts it." "Then help me out." Todd licked dry lips. The bridge wasn't supposed to be open that night. They moved crews through after hours to fix a support plate cheap before state inspectors came. Mason was down there. Kid saw a crack bigger than they told him, started filming on his phone, saying he wasn't going back under there. Somebody grabbed him, there was yelling, then he ran. Next day, the bridge came down and everybody agreed on weather and bad luck. Nora felt each word like a step onto thinning ice. Who grabbed him? Todd's eyes shifted to the curtain as if he expected somebody to walk through it. "I never saw. I heard. But Danny did. Danny helped move money after. Church donations, booster club reimbursements, fake contractor invoices. He thought he was protecting Grant. Then he found out it wasn't just money. It was a boy. Was Mason dead before the collapse?" Todd started crying then, quietly, and with visible shame. "I don't know. I don't know. But I know a second phone existed. Pike had it." Before Nora could press further, the cardiac monitor beside the bed began to shrill. Todd's mouth worked soundlessly, his skin draining color, and a nurse shoved Nora back as the room filled with staff. Later, the doctor would say it was likely a stress-triggered arrhythmia worsened by internal injuries. All Nora knew in that moment was that a second man tied to the bridge had nearly died trying to talk. By sunrise, Bellhaven was buzzing. Rumors moved faster than facts, and facts were already radioactive. A local blogger posted blurry footage of Eli being led into the station, calling him a prime suspect before breakfast. Grant Holloway held a brief statement outside the county administration building, jaw set, wife by his side, saying he mourned Coach Pike and had full faith in law enforcement. He looked straight into the cameras like a man who had practiced grief in the mirror. Nora watched from her office TV with Reese Harmon standing in the doorway. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. "That he's careful? That if you bring him in without something solid, the state's gonna hand this to a special prosecutor and bury you with it." Reese and Nora had never been friends, but he was not stupid. "Then we get something solid," she said. She plugged the flash drive into an isolated laptop. At first it looked like old worksite photos, rusted bolts, concrete forms, time-stamped shots from beneath the bridge. Then came video clips. In one, a shaky beam of flashlight skimmed over a support seam split nearly clean through. Mason Vick's voice, younger than death should ever sound, whispered, "They're making us weld over this. This thing ain't safe." Another voice snapped from off-camera, "Put the phone down and do the job." The face never appeared, but Nora recognized the voice anyway, felt it in her spine before her brain caught up. Her husband, Ben Weller, former county deputy, current safety consultant for Holloway Construction. They had been separated 8 months, long enough that the town had gotten bored of speculating and moved on, but not so long that hearing his voice over buried evidence didn't split something open in her chest. Reese looked from the screen to her face and immediately knew. "Sheriff." She held up a hand. The next clip was worse. Mason running, camera jerking wildly through darkness, breath tearing in and out, a shout behind him, a stumble. Then black water and static, no body visible, no clear impact, just the terrifying suggestion that the official story had never even bothered to get close to the truth. Nora shut the laptop and stood very still. Ben had spent months telling her their marriage failed because she trusted the worst in people, and he was tired of living under suspicion. Now here he was, inside a dead boy's last secret. Around noon, she drove to the cottage he had rented near the marina since leaving the house. Bellhaven sat 20 miles from the coast, close enough to smell salt on windy days, close enough that people liked to imagine themselves freer than they were. Ben was on the porch fixing a busted deck rail when she pulled in. He looked up, saw her face, and set the drill down without speaking. "Tell me why your voice is on Mason Vick's phone," she said. Ben closed his eyes once, as if some final private hope had ended. "You found it. Answer me." "I was on site because Grant asked me to assess a complaint before the inspectors came." "A complaint about a bridge support splitting open?" "About moisture damage. That's what he told me." And when the teenager filming it realized he was being lied to, Ben stepped off the porch. "Nora, I never touched that kid. Did anybody? I don't know. That's not good enough." For the first time in years, Ben looked scared of her instead of angry. Mason panicked. He thought if he posted the video, somebody would blame him for being there. Grant's brother-in-law, Wes Talcott, was running the overnight crew. Wes got rough with him, grabbed his shoulder, yelled. Mason tore loose and ran toward the access road. I followed for maybe 10 yards, then lost sight in the rain. 10 minutes later, part of the bridge gave. By the time we got down there, all anybody could talk about was saving the company, saving the county contracts, saving the election cycle. Todd said the kid had likely gone home. Grant said if we admitted unauthorized labor and prior damage, the county would get sued into the ground. So you lied. I signed a statement saying I arrived after the collapse. Nora laughed, low and horrified. You lied about a dead child. I told myself maybe he really had just left. Then they found the car in the creek, and everybody locked into the story. Everybody? Not Danny. He helped move records, but he started asking questions after Mason's mother kept coming around the field house with flyers, like the truth might still be walking somewhere. Danny drank more, started talking about confession. Nora stepped closer. Did you kill him? Ben flinched at the words as though she had slapped him. No. She believed that answer less than she wanted to and more than she should have. Then who did? Ben looked toward the marsh beyond the trees. Wes would do anything, Grant asked. But Grant never asks straight. He makes you want to solve his problems for him. That afternoon, Nora obtained warrants, informed the State Bureau, and did the thing she had been dreading since the flash drive loaded. She had Ben brought in for questioning by outside investigators. Bellhaven exploded over it. By evening, people were camped outside the station with phones out, some calling her brave, more calling her disloyal. Cal came by after work and found her alone in the briefing room staring at the evidence board. You really turned in your husband, he said. He turned himself in 2 years ago. I just signed the paper. Cal stood beside her, looking at Mason's school photo pinned next to Danny's. When Darren came home after those night shifts, he used to sit on my porch and throw up before he went inside. I asked him once what was wrong. He said, some money ain't worth keeping. I thought he meant drugs. Maybe he meant this. Nora looked at her brother. Why didn't you tell me? Because in this family we survive first and explain later. You know that better than me. She did. That was the sickness at the center of all of it. Not just county corruption, or campaign money, or one violent man. It was the ordinary American habit of choosing the smaller immediate loss over the larger moral one, until the math turned monstrous. At 7:40 p.m., just as the state agents were arriving, a call came from Maddie at County Hospital. Todd Garrison was gone, not discharged, gone. His IV had been removed cleanly. Security footage showed a maintenance worker wheeling him through a service corridor in a cap and mask, and the badge used to open the exit belonged to a janitor who had been off shift for 6 hours. Nora was already moving before Maddie finished speaking. Get the footage sent to my phone now. Reese met her at the cruiser with a printout in hand. We also got this. It was a typed note left on Danny Pike's desk at the high school, found by the principal after classes ended. 3 lines only. If the sheriff opens the water, the whole town drowns. Ask her what her father took the night Mason vanished. Nora read it twice, then a third time, and the past opened under her feet. Their father, Dean Mercer, had been a tow truck driver and part-time county salvage contractor before his stroke. On the night Mason vanished, Dean had been called to pull a vehicle from the creek below Rayner Bridge. He had told everyone the car was empty when he got there, and that state divers handled the rest. He had died the following winter without revisiting the story. Once, Cal saw Nora's face and went cold. What did Dad take? He asked. She folded the note and looked toward the darkening window, where the reflection of the evidence board hovered over the parking lot like a second, haunted room. I think, she said, already knowing the answer would cost more than anything she had paid yet, that we're about to find out our family was standing in this, long before Eli ever walked under those bleachers. Cal stared at her for a long second, then grabbed the back of a chair like the room had tilted under him. No, he said. But it was the kind of no people say when they are arguing with the shape of what is already true. Nora did not answer because she could feel the old pieces locking together too fast now. Every family silence turning from irritation into evidence. Their father had never been a powerful man, never one of the suits or donors or elected officials. But small towns did not stay corrupt by relying only on powerful men. They needed useful ones, men with trucks and chains and access roads. Men who knew how to keep their mouths shut because somebody higher up had once done them a favor or promised to do one later. Reese was already asking dispatch for every remaining log from the night Mason vanished, every tow report, every river recovery note, every county invoice that mentioned Dean Mercer. But Nora barely heard him. She could see her father in his orange raincoat, cigarette tucked behind one ear, boots sunk in mud by the creek bank, looking at something he knew he should report, and deciding in one private, irreversible second to lift it into his truck instead. What are you thinking? Cal asked. That whoever sent this note knows enough to hurt us and enough to know where it hurts worst. Or they're bluffing. No. She folded the paper again. They knew Dad was there before state records would show it. That's not rumor. Cal rubbed both hands over his face. Dad had that lockbox in his bedroom till he got sick. Nora looked up sharply. What lockbox? Gray metal thing under the bed. He wouldn't let anybody touch it. After the stroke, Maddie helped clean the house, and I remember it was gone. Gone where? I don't know. I figured maybe Darren took it. Darren was around a lot then. Maddie, still standing in the hall outside the briefing room, with her phone in hand from the hospital call, said quietly, I saw Uncle Darren loading something into his truck after Grandma's funeral. I thought it was Dad's old tools. Nora's pulse kicked harder. Darren again. Not as the cause this time, but as the last carrier of something older and uglier than his own failures. Darren dead, Dad dead, Danny Pike dead, Todd Garrison missing. That was how these networks survived, not by making people immortal, but by keeping the truth moving through the hands of men likely to break before they spoke. Nora turned to Reese. Pull Darren's impound inventory from Knoxville. Everything recovered with his effects. Already on it. And get me the footage from County Hospital blown up frame by frame. I want the maintenance workers' height, gait, whatever we can get. Reese nodded and left. Cal remained where he was, shoulders locked, breathing too shallow. If Dad hid something, he said. You think he was protecting us? Nora almost answered yes out of reflex, because the dead earn a kindness the living often do not, but she was too tired to lie beautifully. I think he was protecting himself first, maybe us too, but not enough. Cal took that like a punch. For all his resentment of their father, some part of him had remained faithful to the simpler version of Dean Mercer, the hard-working widower who paid the bills and drank too much on Christmas. Nora had lost access to that version years earlier, maybe back when she first realized duty and love were not allies by default. She drove straight from the station to the old Mercer house, now empty except for stacked furniture and the stale mineral smell of closed rooms. Cal followed in his truck. The night had gone cold, and the pines around the property hissed in the wind. Inside, their father's bedroom still held the shape of him more than the contents did. Sun-faded wallpaper, a depression in the mattress, the old bronze lamp with the crooked shade. They pulled the bed away from the wall and checked beneath the floor vent, inside the closet crawlspace, behind dresser drawers. Nothing. Nora moved methodically because method was how she kept panic from turning into mistakes. Cal moved like a man searching for proof his childhood had not been counterfeit. In the back of the closet, Nora found a shallow scratch line in the baseboard, a rectangle half hidden by paint. She knelt, ran her fingers along it, and felt the catch give. A narrow panel popped loose. Behind it was not a box but a wrapped oilcloth bundle the length of her forearm. Cal made a sound somewhere between relief and dread. Nora set the bundle on the bed and peeled it open. Inside were three things: an old flip phone sealed in a freezer bag, a brass key tagged with the number 214, and a folded envelope addressed in Dean Mercer's cramped handwriting to Nora, Cal, and Darren if things go bad. For several seconds, none of them moved. Then Cal said, "Open it." Nora unfolded the letter carefully. Dean's words were blunt, with no attempt at grace. If you are reading this, then one of two things happened. Either I'm dead and Darren has gone looking where I told him not to, or somebody is asking questions again about the bridge and the Vic boy. I didn't kill that child. I want that written plain. But I did take something from the car before the county men came down the bank. Grant Holloway's man, Wes, told me there was paperwork in the glove box that could bankrupt the county and put half the town out of work. He said, move the car, let the divers do their part, and forget what I saw. What I saw was a second phone on the floorboard and a ring of keys under the seat. There was blood on the passenger side, and nobody in the car. I took both. I told myself I was holding them so no one else could bury them. Truth is, I was scared. Holloway had already paid Darren's hospital bill the year before, and when a man owes money, he starts thinking he owes his soul in installments. I put the keys where they couldn't be found. The phone I couldn't bring myself to destroy. If things go bad, room 214 at the Sunset Motor Lodge. Paid cash. Renewed every 3 months through a box service. Don't trust anybody asking nice. Especially churchmen. Cal read the letter over Nora's shoulder, then sat down hard on the edge of the dresser bench. Jesus Christ, Maddie whispered. There was blood in Mason's car? Nora reread that line twice. Passenger side. Nobody in the car. Which meant what? Mason injured someone? Someone rode with him after the site confrontation? Someone else had been in that car when it went off the bridge or before it was staged there? The official timeline cracked wider. She held up the brass key. Sunset Motor Lodge. Cal stood back up. That dump off Highway 19? Still open? Maddie asked. Barely, Nora said. Bellhaven kept places like that alive out of neglect more than commerce. The kind of roadside motel where long-term secrets paid more reliably than tourists. 20 minutes later, they were in 2 vehicles headed south under a moon half hidden by cloud. Nora called for a warrant en route and had it waiting electronically by the time they pulled into the gravel lot. The neon sunset sign buzzed with missing letters, making the place look like it could only promise an ending, never rest. Room 214 sat on the second floor at the far corner. Reese and 2 deputies met them there. Manager says the room's been paid on time by money order for years, Reese said. Nobody's supposed to enter unless the renter requests service. Name? Fake. Daniel Moore. Nora unlocked the door. The room smelled of dust, old AC filters, and paper sealed too long in heat. A single lamp lit a narrow bed, a chipped table, blackout curtains, and metal filing boxes stacked in the closet like someone had built a second nervous system in secret. Cal stayed by the door at first, as though crossing fully into the room would make the letter final. Nora put on gloves and opened the first box. Inside were duplicate permits, handwritten ledgers, campaign donation lists, church reimbursement slips, and copies of engineering memos. The second held flash drives, newspaper clippings about the bridge collapse, and a county map with access roads marked in red ink. The third box contained a smaller tackle box. Inside that were Mason Vick's school ID on a broken lanyard, a keyring with a corroded car fob, and 2 plain keys, and a smartphone wrapped in a yellow shop rag. Even before she powered it on, Nora knew this had to be the phone Dean took from the car. He kept all of it, Cal said, his voice thick with disgust and wonder. He kept it all, and never went to you. Nora did not respond. She was already seeing what it meant. Dean Mercer had not just hidden a few stray pieces. He had curated leverage, enough to protect himself, enough maybe to protect Darren when Darren started unraveling, enough to use if the wrong people came after the family. It was cowardice, but it was also fear shaped into a system. She charged the phone with a cable from the evidence kit. The screen finally lit after a long minute, and with it came a lock prompt. Reese said, "Can tech brute force it?" But Nora looked at Mason's school ID in the box, at the graduation year, then at the birthday on the back. She entered the 6 digits. The phone unlocked. Cal let out a breath that sounded like a man losing faith in coincidence. The gallery was sparse. Most files had likely been scrubbed or never synced, but a hidden notes app contained dated entries. Not many, written in the compressed language of someone trying to remind himself what mattered without getting caught. Need to tell Mama if anything happens. Wes made me go under Southside Plate. Danny saw. Mr. Weller said don't use phone. Heard Todd say move car later if kid talks. Last entry, time-stamped the evening before the collapse. They lying about crack. Grant not there, but everybody saying his name like prayer. If I leave and something happens, it's on them. Under the notes sat one audio file recorded at 11:43 p.m., the night Mason died. Nora hit play. Rain battered the microphone. Mason's breath came ragged and fast. Another male voice, closer than in the flash drive video, said, "Get in the damn car. We'll sort this out." Mason answered, "Don't touch me." There was shoving, a grunt, then a different voice from farther off Danny Pike, unmistakable now that she knew to hear him yelling, "Wes, let him go. Enough." A door slammed, tires spun. Then Mason shouted, "He's bleeding, man. He's bleeding." And the recording cut. Nobody in the room moved. Even the motel AC sounded like it had gone quieter. Reese spoke first. "Passenger side blood." Nora nodded slowly. There was someone else with Mason. Cal looked sick. Who was bleeding? Maybe Wes. Maybe somebody Mason hit trying to get away. Maybe someone already hurt before they got in the car. She scrolled further and found a short video shot from inside a vehicle at night. The image was dark, but enough streetlight caught a face in the passenger seat to turn everybody rigid. Todd Garrison. Blood visible at his temple. He was saying, "You never put this in writing. You hear me? You tell Grant I never signed off on." Then Mason's voice from behind the camera. "I'm taking you to the sheriff." The video ended mid-turn, as if the phone had been dropped. Todd. Not just a fixer afterward. In the car with Mason before the collapse. Injured. Lying for 2 years. Nearly dying in the hospital before he disappeared. He wasn't running from them, Nora said aloud, thinking it through. He was trying to bring Todd in. Reese stared at the screen. Then why'd Todd say he only heard things? Because if he admitted he was there, he admitted everything after. Cal sank into the motel chair and covered his mouth. Dad knew this. All of it. Nora looked at the rows of boxes and understood something else. Dean had not kept the motel room just to hide evidence from Grant Holloway. He had kept it because he never believed the story had stopped moving. Somebody had kept paying attention. Somebody had maybe known where this room was all along, and waited, letting fear do most of the work. Her phone buzzed. Hospital security had finished enhancing the footage of Todd's abduction. The still image loaded grainy and gray. But the man beneath the cap was identifiable enough once Nora saw the tilt of the shoulders, the heavy set through the chest, the old baseball injury in the right leg that made the stride swing slightly wide. Wes Talcott. We've got him, Reese said. Maybe, Nora replied. Unless he wants us to. That earned a sharp look. She held it anyway. Men like Wes were not planners in the abstract, but they could be useful instruments. If Todd had been taken alive, then either Wes needed him quiet, somewhere private, or somebody above Wes needed to clean the last witness properly. She called in the bolo, statewide. Then she stepped onto the motel walkway for air and found Cal following her out. The parking lot below was empty except for their vehicles and a flickering soda machine near the office. You were right, he said after a minute. About all of it. Nora almost laughed because he said it like a confession and a surrender. No, I wasn't right. I was late. You think if you'd looked earlier, this doesn't happen? She did think that, of course. Sheriffs trained themselves to avoid counterfactual fantasies because they made terrible evidence, and even worse, sleep. But guilt did not care about training. Danny might still be alive, she said. Todd might not be in a trunk somewhere. And Eli? Cal asked quietly. Does he get his life back after people watched him walk into that station? Nora looked over the rail at the highway beyond the motel sign, the occasional headlights cutting past without noticing any of them. Small towns loved their children publicly and fed on them privately. Eli would carry Friday night in his body for years, whether the law cleared him tomorrow or not. Not fully, she said. But I can stop the rest. Cal leaned on the rail beside her. Dad used to say, once a thing is in the water, it touches every house downstream. Nora turned toward him. And yet he put this in a motel instead of bringing it in. Because he was a coward. Because he was scared, Cal corrected, then shook his head in disgust at himself. Listen to me. I'm still trying to make him easier to live with. Nora knew the impulse. Their father was dead. Grant Holloway was alive. It was always more tempting to shave down the sins of the dead because they could not hurt anyone new, but the dead had built the scaffolding. Her phone rang again. Reese's voice came fast through the line, though he was only inside the room. You need to hear this. One of the flash drives has recent files. Someone accessed the room less than a month ago. Nora went back in. The computer screen showed motel security stills from a cheap USB archive camera someone had hidden facing the room interior. Dean, paranoid or practical, had set up his own record. Most clips were empty maintenance checks from years back, but one from 3 weeks earlier showed the door opening and a man entering at 2:13 a.m. He wore a ball cap low and gloves, but when he turned toward the lamp to inspect the boxes, the side of his face came clear enough. Ben Weller. Nora felt a fresh, more intimate betrayal settle into place like cold iron. He knew, she said. Reese watched her carefully. Looks that way. He didn't tell Grant, or they'd have cleaned this room out, unless he was waiting. For what? No one answered because the obvious answer was unbearable. For her. For the right pressure point. For when the family, the marriage, the case all intersected enough to control. Nora scrubbed both hands over her mouth, then forced them down. Get a state team to Ben's cottage again. Full search. Every device, every storage unit, every bank record. And I want his interview transcripts rechecked against this footage. Reese nodded and started making calls. Maddie, who had stayed silent through most of the evidence review, asked the question Nora had been avoiding. Do you think Ben was trying to protect you or use you? The room went still. Nora answered honestly because anything else would poison the rest of the work. I think he stopped knowing the difference a long time ago. Close to midnight, a call came from one of the state troopers manning the North County roads. Wes Talcott's truck had been spotted near the abandoned bait warehouse out by Gannett Marsh, the old one with storm damage and no utilities, a place teenagers used to dare each other to enter until a roof section collapsed. Nora knew the location immediately. Isolated, accessible by service road, close enough to the water to dispose of evidence or a body if somebody had the stomach. She was in the cruiser, before Reese finished the briefing. Cal caught her arm at the parking lot. You are not leaving me behind again. This is not family business. It became family business when Dad hit a dead kid's phone and my son got dragged under those bleachers. I'm coming. Nora almost refused, then looked at him and saw that he would follow anyway, likely in worse ways. You stay outside the perimeter, she said. If I say leave, you leave. The drive to Gannett Marsh took them through low roads, lined with black reeds and tidal ditches that reflected the moon in broken strips. The warehouse appeared all at once beyond a stand of cedar, hunched and skeletal, one loading bay hanging half open. Troopers killed their headlights a quarter-mile out. The rest of the approach went on foot. Nora moved with the team along the ditch line, damp mud sucking at her boots, heart steady in the way it only got when fear had finally narrowed into direction. Through the cracked siding of the warehouse, she saw lantern light and the shape of a truck backed to the bay. A man stood near the open tailgate. Another form lay on the floor inside. Reese whispered, "One standing. One down." Nora raised a hand, signaling position. Then the standing man bent, and the lantern light caught his profile. Not Wes. Ben. The shock of it nearly stalled her body. Ben crouched beside the prone figure, saying something too low to hear. Then a second man emerged from the deeper shadows, Wes Talcott, shotgun in hand. Whatever this was, it was worse and stranger than simple cleanup. Nora stepped from cover before she had fully planned to. "Sheriff's Department," she shouted. "Drop it, both of you." The scene detonated. Wes swung the shotgun up. Ben wheeled around, hands already rising. Troopers flooded the doorway with beams and weapons trained. The prone man on the floor groaned. Todd Garrison, wrists zip-tied, face waxy and bruised. "Wes, don't," Ben said sharply. Wes backed toward the bay opening with the gun half raised, eyes wild and insulted at being cornered. "This ain't on me," he barked. "I did what I was told." "By who?" Nora demanded. "Say it." Wes laughed, ugly and frantic. "You think it matters? You think saying his name changes who all cashed the checks?" He jerked the barrel toward Ben. "He was gonna fix this. Him and me were gonna hand you Todd and make it look clean." Ben's face changed. Not toward guilt exactly, but toward the collapse of a last control. "That's not what I said. You said she'd listen if it came from you." Nora felt every eye in the warehouse flick toward her and kept her weapon steady. "Ben, get down." He did not. "Nora." Wes took Todd from the hospital because Todd was going to run to the feds. Grant wanted time. "I came here to get Todd out before Wes." Wes fired. The blast blew splinters from a beam beside Ben's shoulder and sent troopers diving for cover. Someone returned fire. Lantern glass exploded. Darkness and shouting slammed together. Nora moved on instinct toward Todd's position, dropped behind a rusted pallet stack, and heard Wes crashing toward the rear exit. Ben was on the floor, cursing, one hand clamped to his upper arm where blood was beginning to soak through. "Todd," Nora shouted. "Can you move?" Todd made a strangled sound that might have been yes. Reese and two troopers pushed after Wes through the rear of the warehouse while Nora crawled to Todd, cut his restraints, and rolled him onto his side. He smelled of sweat, iodine, and fear. "He said Grant was coming," Todd rasped. "Said if I talked, all of us burned." "Where is Grant now?" "Church." Nora stared at him. "What?" Todd swallowed with effort. "He's at the church council fundraiser. Everybody's there. He said if he was seen in public the whole time, nobody could pin anything on him." Of course, Bellhaven's most durable alibi had always been public righteousness. Nora looked toward Ben. He was pale but conscious, propped against a post, breathing hard. "Is that true?" she demanded. Ben nodded once through pain. He wanted Todd hidden till morning, then moved. "I came because I thought I could flip Todd and save." He stopped. "Save what?" Nora asked, though she knew. "You," he said, and that was the cruelest answer because he probably believed it. Outside, another shot echoed across the marsh, then silence except for radios. Reese came back in 2 minutes later, muddy and furious. "Wes is down. Leg wound. Alive." Nora stood slowly, every thread in her body pulled tight toward the next step. Church fundraiser. Grant in public. Surrounded by donors, pastors, school board members, maybe cameras. The kind of room where truth had to arrive all at once, or it would be talked to death. She looked at Todd, at Ben bleeding against the post, at the wreckage around them, and knew the ending phase had begun whether she wanted it or not. "EMTs are inbound," Reese said. "State says hold scene." "We will," Nora replied, already reaching for her radio. "And then we go to church." The fundraiser at First Baptist of Bellhaven was still going when Nora's convoy rolled into the gravel overflow lot. Blue lights cut dark and sirens off, the kind of quiet law enforcement arrival that frightened people more than noise ever could. Through the fellowship hall windows, she could see round tables, white cloths, cheap centerpieces, men in blazers and women in church dresses, holding paper plates and nodding through a speech being given at the microphone. Grant Holloway stood near the stage, one hand on the back of a chair, smiling with the solemn restraint of a man performing humility for donors. For one strange second, with marsh mud drying on her boots and warehouse dust still in her hair. Nora thought how absurdly American it was that a county could be rotting at the center and still pause to auction off pies under fluorescent lights. Reese walked beside her, voice low. State Bureau says keep it controlled. They're 10 minutes out. 10 minutes is enough time for Grant to walk out a side door and spend the next year telling lawyers I targeted him in public for politics. Then, let's not give him the side door. Cal stayed at him rise, the edge of the lot, with 2 deputies as ordered, but she could feel him watching every move. Maddie had gone with the ambulance back toward the hospital to keep eyes on Todd and Ben. That left Nora with the law, the evidence, and the old fact that none of them would matter if she lost the room. Inside the hall, the speech sputtered to a stop the moment the outer doors opened. Heads turned in a wave, forks lowered. Grant's smile stayed on his face 1 beat too long, then changed into concern, polished enough to pass for innocence at a distance. Pastor Lyle stepped forward first, confusion and indignation already rising in him. Sheriff, is everything all right? No, Nora said. Commissioner Holloway needs to come with us. A ripple moved through the room hard enough to seem physical. Grant did not move from his place near the stage. On what grounds? He asked, his voice carrying easily without the microphone. He was good at that, at sounding calm enough to make anyone confronting him appear unreasonable by contrast. Conspiracy, witness intimidation, obstruction, and probable involvement in the concealment of evidence in the Mason Vick case and the murder of Danny Pike, Nora said. The words landed like thrown bricks. Somebody gasped. Somebody else said, Lord have mercy. With such reflexive softness, it might have been genuine prayer or just social habit. Grant looked around at the room before he looked back at Nora, as if reminding the witnesses what version of him they knew. That is a serious allegation to make in front of this community. Then you can answer it in front of the law. I would be happy to speak with counsel present. You can do that at the day. Station. He tilted his head slightly, not defiant, almost sorrowful. This is why people no longer trust institutions. Everything becomes theater. Nora felt the trap as he laid it down. If she argued, he won. If she softened, he won slower. So she stepped farther into the room and said clearly enough for the whole hall to hear, Todd Garrison is alive. Wes Talcott is in custody. We recovered concealed evidence tied to the bridge collapse, unauthorized labor at the site, falsified county records, and material linking multiple people in this room's political orbit to the suppression of Mason Vick's final recordings. The silence after that was total. Grant's wife, Elaine, had gone white. 2 school board members at the back stood up without seeming to know why. Pastor Lyle looked from Grant to Nora and back, his mouth parted by something deeper than surprise. Grant's expression changed at last, not into panic but into calculation stripped of its public coating. You believe whatever frightened, cornered men told you tonight, he said. Men lie to survive. You would know, Nora replied. That drew a murmur from the crowd. Grant took 1 step away from the stage. Sheriff, if you have a warrant, show it. Nora held up the paperwork. Reese moved to her right. Another deputy covered the side exit. For a second, Nora thought Grant might actually surrender. Might decide that going quietly kept alive whatever narrative he planned to build later. Then, an older county engineer named Martin Keene, seated 3 tables from the front, lurched to his feet so abruptly his chair tipped over behind him. Don't, he said, and everybody turned, including Grant. Keene's face was wet with sweat, his hands shaking so hard he had to brace them on the tablecloth. Don't stand there and act shocked. Don't you do that. Grant's voice lowered in warning. Martin. No. Keene pointed at him with a hand that would not hold still. No more of your calm. I signed 1 revised report. 1. You said the county needed time and the state would never know. Then the bridge came down and suddenly it was weather, and then a boy was dead, and then everybody was praying over casseroles while you made sure nobody wrote the wrong thing down. Elaine Holloway whispered, Grant? But he did not look at her. Pastor Lyle stepped down from the stage, stricken. Martin, what are you saying? I'm saying we lied. Keene burst out. We all lied in pieces because it was easier in pieces. The crack report was real. The closure order draft was real. Todd said, hold it. Wes said the site would be cleared by dawn. Danny Pike came to me later asking if Mason had really been authorized to work, and I told him to leave it alone because I was a coward. His voice broke on the last word. 1 woman at the nearest table began to cry quietly. Another man cursed under his breath and walked for the bathroom like he physically could not remain standing there another second. Nora never took her eyes off Grant. This was the moment where men like him either unraveled or became dangerous. He chose dangerous. Martin's had a drinking problem for years, he said evenly, and the sheriff's personal life is already tangled in this investigation. My attorney will enjoy that. My personal life bled into your cover-up because you paid men to lie, Nora said. You used church, school, football, and county contracts like they were one family account. His eyes flicked, just once, toward the side exit where Reese had posted a deputy. There it was, the real man. Not fear of sin, fear of confinement. Nora said, "Don't." Grant ran. It was almost clumsy, which made it more shocking. Chairs scraped. Elaine screamed his name. He shoved through a knot of startled diners and lunged toward the kitchen corridor, knocking a volunteer into the pie table hard enough to send plates crashing to the floor. Reese moved first, cutting him off near the swinging door. Grant drove a shoulder into him with the desperate strength of a man who had never imagined needing his body this way. They hit the wall. A stack of aluminum serving pans came down in a metallic avalanche. Deputies piled in. For a few ugly seconds, the fellowship hall became a wrestling match under a cross. Then Grant was face down on the linoleum, with his wrists cuffed behind him, breathing in ragged, furious bursts. Nora stood over him. "You should have just taken the walk." He turned his head enough to look at her from the floor. Gone was the public softness, the county fair charm, the donor smile. What remained was contempt, so old it felt foundational. "You think this ends with me?" he said. "It ends where the evidence ends." He smiled then, a bloodless little twist of the mouth. "That's not the same place." Even cuffed, he understood Bellhaven better than most innocent men ever would. Around them, the room was shuddering back into motion. Pastor Lyle had sat down heavily in the front row and seemed incapable of standing again. Elaine Holloway stared at her husband as if she had been introduced to him by force. Martin Keene was now bent over with both hands on his knees, weeping in harsh, embarrassed sounds. Nora directed a deputy to separate him and take a statement before courage drained back out of him. Outside, the State Bureau vehicles finally arrived in a line of headlights across the church lot, but the public rupture had already occurred. There would be no keeping this in sealed rooms now. On the drive back to the station, Grant sat behind the cage and said nothing until they crossed the county line marker by the old feed store. Then he leaned forward slightly and asked, "Did Ben tell you I tried to keep your father safe?" Nora kept her eyes on the road. "You don't get to use my father as a favor. He took more than a phone from that car." She felt the words in the base of her neck. Reese, driving the second cruiser behind them, could not hear this. It was just Nora and Grant and the dark road. "What else?" she asked. "Ask Ben. Ben's done talking around things." Grant laughed once. "You still believe men tell the truth when they're caught. They tell what helps. Then you tell me." But he leaned back and shut up again, satisfied that he had placed one more shard somewhere under her skin. At the station, everything widened and accelerated at once. State agents took custody of Grant and Wes. Martin Keene gave a detailed recorded statement that corroborated the altered inspection documents, Todd's role in delaying disclosure, and the existence of emergency closure language stripped from the final file. Todd himself, medicated but coherent, confirmed from the hospital that he had been in Mason's car the night of the collapse after Mason tried to drive him to the sheriff's office. Todd admitted he had been struck during a struggle at the site, claimed Mason panicked when the bridge access road partially gave way in the storm, and said the car swerved after they fought over the wheel. He still insisted he blacked out before the vehicle went into the creek and did not know how he survived, only that Wes dragged him clear, and Grant later told him his life and the county's future now depended on obedience. It was ugly, incomplete, and self-serving, but it was enough to turn conspiracy into structure. Ben, stitched and under guard at the hospital, requested to speak only to Nora before formal counsel attached. State agents hated the request, but the bureau led, a lean woman named Dana Ruiz, who had already assessed Bellhaven in one glance and found it both predictable and exhausting, allowed a limited monitored interview because Ben's statements implicated active evidence recovery. Nora went just before dawn. The hospital hallway smelled of bleach and stale coffee, the universal scent of decisions made overnight. Ben lay propped up in bed, one arm bandaged, face gray with blood loss and something like relief that looked insulting on him. Dana stood in the corner. A camera recorded from the counter. Nora stayed by the door. "Grant says my father took more than the phone." Ben closed his eyes briefly. He took Todd's briefcase. "Where is it?" "I don't know." "Wrong answer. It's the truth." Ben opened his eyes and looked at her fully. "Dean met me once, 3 months after Mason died. He told me if Grant ever forgot who else could burn, he'd remember him. Dean had a leather briefcase and said there was enough in it to ruin men who thought they were untouchable. I told him to go to the state. He laughed in my face." Nora stared. "You never told me this. Would you have believed I was trying to do the right thing then? Were you?" Ben swallowed. Not enough. That was the truest sentence he had spoken in months, maybe years. Dana Ruiz stepped in. What was in the briefcase? I saw invoices, handwritten notes, and a cassette tape, old dictation kind. Dean wouldn't let me touch it. Why were you in the motel room 3 weeks ago? Nora asked. Ben's jaw tightened. Because Darren contacted me before he died. That hit harder than she expected. What? Not in person. He mailed me a key copy and a note from Tennessee. Said if anything happened to him, I needed to make sure you never found the room before he could explain certain things. I ignored it for months. Then, when Danny Pike started circling questions, I got scared Grant would start cleaning up loose ends and come after you through the family. I went to see what Dean had hidden. And you left it there. I couldn't tell what Dean had copied, what he'd faked, what would blow up your father's name versus what would make the case. I told myself I needed time. Nora laughed softly, the sound stripped of humor. Everybody needed time. That's how boys die and men fundraise. Ben flinched. I know. No, you know consequences now because they've finally reached your body. He took that without defense. Dana asked. Anything else Dean said? Ben hesitated. Nora saw it and went cold. Say it. He said Mason wasn't the first near miss on that bridge. There'd been another incident weeks earlier. A worker injured bad enough to talk lawsuit. Grant paid him off, but Todd kept the original claim paperwork and audio of the settlement conversation as insurance. That's what was in the briefcase, I think. Dean said Todd feared paper less than voices. Cassette tape, not just money trails, recorded voices. Nora felt the path widen again, not into a new conflict, but into the missing center of the same one. If Dean had hidden Todd's briefcase separately from the motel room, it meant even he had not trusted himself to keep everything together. Did Dean say where? Ben shook his head. Only that no Mercer would ever think to look there, because we all hated the place. Cal came to mind instantly, then the old geography of their family did the rest. The river garage, she said before she knew it. The abandoned salvage garage their father had once rented down by the county impound yard, where he and Cal used to fight so loudly the neighbors could hear it over compressors, where Darren had gotten arrested at 19 for stealing copper out the back. The place every Mercer had agreed to forget. She left the hospital without another word. Dawn was beginning to gray the sky when she, Cal, and Reese pulled through the chained entrance of the old river garage. The building stood half-collapsed behind a fence line strangled by weeds, the office windows boarded, the bay doors warped with rust. Cal got out and looked at the place like it had insulted him personally. You think he'd stash it here? You hated it. Darren hated it. I hated it. That makes it perfect. They cut the chain and went in. The office smelled of mouse droppings, damp paper, and engine oil sunk so deep into the concrete it would likely outlast the building. Nora swept her light over shelves. An old desk, a pegboard stripped nearly bare. Nothing obvious. In the rear bay, the floor drain had backed up long ago, leaving a stain like dark water frozen in motion. Cal kicked at an overturned cabinet. Dad was sick by then. Why haul stuff all the way here? Because he trusted places more than people, Nora said. Then she saw it. One cinder block in the office wall newer than the rest, mortared clumsily into an otherwise uniform run. She brought a hammer from the workbench and struck twice. The block cracked. Behind it was a narrow cavity holding a leather briefcase wrapped in contractor plastic. Cal made a noise of raw disbelief. Nora set it on the desk and opened the clasps. Inside were copies of settlement drafts, a ledger linking county discretionary funds to Shell vendor payments, and a microcassette labeled TG Private in Todd Garrison's neat handwriting. Also inside sat a Polaroid photo, the kind taken fast and forgotten until it became evidence. It showed Mason Vick standing in muddy jeans beside the South Bridge access road, angry and alive, pointing at something out of frame. Todd stood partly visible in the background. On the back, Dean had written in pen, "Before storm, before lie." Reese found a recorder in an evidence bin from the cruiser that still accepted microcassette adapters. They listened in the dead office while morning birds started up outside like the town had earned a normal day. The tape hissed, clicked, then gave them Todd's voice and Grant's, recorded in what sounded like a car. Todd was saying, "If he files workers' comp and sues, we have a labor violation, a disclosure issue, and those inspection notes still floating." Grant answered, irritated rather than panicked. "Then pay him and bury the notes. Don't say it back to me like a confession," Todd said. "And if the Vic boy posts the video?" A long pause followed. Then Grant said, very clearly, "Then you convince him the future matters more than honesty. If that fails, Wes will handle the scene. No direct murder order. Men like Grant were too skilled for that. But it was enough." The tape kept going. Todd asked, "And Danny?" Grant replied, Danny likes being needed. Keep him inside the church lane and football lane. Men forgive themselves if the crowd still cheers. Cal looked sick by the end of it. Nora stopped the recorder and sat in silence long enough to hear the building settle. This was the voice evidence Ben mentioned. The proof that Grant had not merely benefited from a cover-up, but orchestrated its language, its pressure, its social camouflage. This is it, Reese said. This is enough to bury him. Nora nodded, but the feeling was not triumph. It was exhaustion edged with grief. Enough to bury him did not unbury Mason or Danny. It did not remove Eli's terror under the bleachers, or give Cal back his idea of their father, or restore anything she and Ben had broken. It just meant the truth had finally acquired a weight the county could not politely step around. By noon, the state attorney had announced charges in a press conference held not in Bellhaven but at the district courthouse an hour away. A quiet sign that local power no longer controlled the room. News vans arrived by mid-afternoon. The church fundraiser video leaked by evening. Martin Keene resigned on camera. Pastor Lyle released a statement that read like a man discovering his own life in the passive voice. The school district suspended Booster Club finance officers pending audit. Mason Vick's mother, Laura, came to the station in a denim jacket and flat shoes like she had errands to run after this. Because grief trains people to keep part of their day ordinary even when the world tears open. Nora met her in the interview room where Eli had sat 2 nights earlier. Laura was smaller than Nora remembered, or maybe just worn down into sharpness. She did not cry. "I was told you have something that belongs to my son," she said. Nora placed Mason's school ID, the recovered phone, and a printed still from the video on the table, but kept the deeper evidence file back for now. Laura touched the cracked case of the phone with one fingertip. He hated that case. Said it made him look 12. The softness of the memory nearly undid Nora. "Mrs. Vick," she began, then stopped because titles felt absurd between women with this much ruin on the table. "Laura, we have enough now to show Mason was at the bridge site unlawfully, that officials concealed safety failures, and that the circumstances of his death were misrepresented." Laura nodded, as if each clause matched an answer she had been carrying alone for too long. Did he know he was going to die? The question struck the room still. Nora chose truth without decoration. "I don't know. I know he fought to tell what he saw." Laura closed her eyes. That sounds like him. When she opened them again, there was rage there, but steadier than tears. Will they say his name right this time? Or will he still be the kid in the weather report? "They'll say it right," Nora said. Laura looked at her a long moment. "You sure?" Nora thought of the county's habits, of public relations and plea deals, and editorials about healing. "I'll make them." Laura took the phone and ID, then paused at the door. "Danny Pike came by my house 6 weeks ago," she said without turning. "He sat on my porch and cried. Told me some men spent their whole lives being decent only after dark, when no one could use it against them. I didn't know what he meant then." After she left, Nora sat alone for a minute, hearing Danny's line repeat in her head, "Decent only after dark." That was half the county, maybe half the country. Cal came by that evening with Eli. The boy looked wrung out, older by some immeasurable but visible amount. "I wanted to tell you myself," Nora said. "You're cleared. Public statement goes out in an hour." Eli nodded, then asked the question that mattered more to him than statements. "So people are going to stop looking at me like that?" Cal closed his eyes briefly. Nora answered with the only honesty available. "Not all at once, but the story is changing." Eli stared at the floor. "Coach Pike wasn't a bad guy." "No," Nora said. "He was a late guy." Eli gave a short, sad laugh despite himself, maybe because that was exactly right. After he and Cal left, Reese lingered in the doorway. "Never thought I'd see the day Bellhaven arrested its golden boy in a fellowship hall. Never thought I'd help make it happen," Nora said. Reese nodded once. "For what it's worth, Sheriff, you didn't blink where most folks would've." She looked at him. Praise from Reese Harmon sounded almost like a mistranslation. "You saying something nice?" "Don't get used to it." He walked off before she could answer. That night, alone in her office, Nora signed the final evidence transfer sheets and watched through the blinds as reporters clustered outside the station fence. Her phone lit with a message from Dana Ruiz. Ben had been formally charged with obstruction, false statements, and evidence tampering, with cooperation noted but not dispositive. He wanted no more special conversations. Good, Nora thought. Special conversations were just another form of private corruption when feelings got involved. She took off her badge and set it on the desk for a minute. Not in resignation, just to feel the skin beneath it breathe. Bellhaven would not love her after this. Some would praise her publicly and resent her privately. Some would say she destroyed the town to save the truth. Some would say she only acted because the lie finally entered her own house. Both things contained enough truth to sting. Near midnight, she drove to Rainer Bridge. The surviving span had been fenced since the collapse, but the creek below still moved with indifferent sound over rocks and silt, carrying moonlight in broken threads downstream. She stood by the barricade and thought of Mason, of Danny, of Dean Mercer hauling secrets in a storm, of Grant learning early that communities confuse familiarity for innocence, of Ben telling himself he was buying time when really he was leasing out parts of his soul. She thought of Cal, who would spend the rest of his life renegotiating what a father is. She thought of Eli, stepping from boyhood into suspicion under stadium lights. Saving one person damages something else, she had told herself as a professional rule. But the deeper truth was uglier. Sometimes saving what remains means admitting what was already sacrificed long before you arrived. Her phone rang once in the quiet. "Maddie, Dad's asking if you want to come by tomorrow," she said. "He says there's coffee and no speeches." Nora looked at the dark water. "Tell him maybe. That means yes with Mercer Grammar." "Probably." Maddie's voice softened. "For what it's worth, Aunt Nora, Eli slept tonight." After the call ended, Nora stayed a little longer by the barricade, letting the night air work its way through the last of the adrenaline. The town behind her was still itself, still full of diners and school gyms and church parking lots, and all the ordinary places where people chose, every day, what version of themselves they could bear to live with. The difference now was that some choices had finally lost the shelter of secrecy. That did not feel like victory. It felt like weather changing over damaged ground. But it was enough, for one night, to stand there and believe the water might carry something cleaner forward than what had been thrown into it. The next morning, Bellhaven woke up in stages, like a patient after surgery who did not yet know which pain belonged to healing and which belonged to damage that would last. By 7, the diner on Maple had 3 tables full of people pretending to discuss weather while watching courthouse footage on the mounted TV. By 8, the high school parking lot was half empty, because parents who had spent years trusting football as a moral system no longer knew what to tell their children about Coach Pike, about the Booster Club, about why grown men lied in church clothes. By 9, Nora was in her office, signing off on another stack of subpoenas, while the front desk took calls from reporters, lawyers, and residents suddenly eager to remember small, odd details they had sat on for 2 years. Consequences rarely arrived with dignity. They came as paperwork, casseroles, gossip, legal notices, and people deciding their conscience had become affordable. Reese stepped in carrying coffee and a new folder. "State attorney wants you downtown at 11. Preliminary press packet review." He set the coffee down. "Also, county admin turned over archived emails. Everybody's scrambling to look cooperative." Nora opened the folder. Inside were printouts of bland correspondence that read differently now that the hidden grammar of the place had been exposed. Delayed inspections, redirected invoices, friendly reminders about Sunday visibility and donor timing. The whole conspiracy had not lived in dramatic criminal language. It had lived in euphemism, scheduling, and civic tone. "This is how they stay alive," she murmured. "Nothing sounds like a crime until you read it next to a dead boy." Reese nodded. "Also got something else. Mason Vic's workers' comp non-filing memo. Drafted, never sent. Todd sat on it." Nora looked up. "Laura seen it?" "Not yet." She closed the file. "She will. Everything that touches her son goes through her first." Reese shifted his weight, hesitating just enough for it to mean something. Ben made bond motion. "Hearings tomorrow." Nora let that settle, without visible reaction. Bond. Procedure. The law flattening personal history into dates and conditions. "State can argue flight risk if they use the motel footage and the marsh scene," she said. "They will." Reese studied her face, maybe checking for cracks, maybe out of habit. "You need me to handle the hearing?" "No. I can stand in the room with him." "That ain't exactly what I meant." Nora almost smiled. "I know." After he left, she sat alone and looked at the framed county map on the wall. The thing struck her suddenly as obscene. All those neat borders and roads on paper pretending counties are orderly systems, when really they are made of loyalties, debts, grudges, and the stories people repeat to keep from feeling complicit. Bellhaven would spend years rediscovering its own boundaries after this. The law would sort charges and plea agreements. The community would sort shame more slowly and much less honestly. At 10:30, Cal appeared at her doorway holding a white bakery box that looked absurd in his hand. "Maddie said coffee means pastries too if I'm trying to avoid speeches," he said. Nora eyed the box. "You brought bribery into a sheriff's office." "Store-bought, technically humble." She took him in for a second. He looked tired but steadier, as if the first blunt force of revelation had passed and left behind a rougher, more workable grief. "Come in." He sat across from her and opened the box. 2 cinnamon rolls, 3 plain donuts, and 1 apple fritter the size of a steering wheel. "Eli?" she asked. "At home. Slept, like Maddie said." Then asked if he could go back to practice next week. Cal gave a short, broken laugh. Kid's brain is either miraculous or deeply American. Probably both. Cal's smile faded. He asked if Coach Pike was good or bad. I told him people can do bad things while trying too late to be good, and that maybe adulthood is realizing those are not separate species. Nora looked at her brother, surprised and not. Crisis had always sharpened him into the man he might have been if life had given him fewer reasons to stay defended. "That's better than most sermons in this town. Low bar." He slid the bakery box aside. "I've been thinking about Dad." Nora leaned back. "That sounds dangerous." "It is." Cal stared at his hands. "I keep trying to land on one version of him, and none of them hold. He took evidence from a dead kid's car and hid it. That's unforgivable. But he also kept it from men who would have burned everything. He left us the trail when things went bad. Maybe that's cowardice. Maybe it's the closest thing to courage he had in stock." Nora let the silence sit. The hardest part of family was that people were rarely only the wound they caused or only the poor explanation for it. "He was weak in the way a lot of men are," she said at last. "He wanted protection without sacrifice. He wanted leverage instead of truth. But somewhere in him he knew the truth had to survive longer than he would." Cal nodded slowly. "You think that matters? To history, maybe. To the people he failed? Not enough." That seemed to relieve him more than a gentler answer would have. Before he left, he stood awkwardly by the door and said, "Maddie wants Sunday dinner. Real one. Not funeral food, not apology food, just dinner." Nora watched the light from the blinds stripe the floor between them. Mercer family invitations almost never arrived without barbed wire hidden in them. This one felt different. "Tell her I'll come." Cal gave a small nod. "No speeches. You don't control me." "I absolutely do not," he said, and went out. At 11, the district courthouse press room was colder than it needed to be. All beige walls and state seals, and the faint smell of printer toner. Dana Ruiz stood at the front table with the state attorney, reviewing charge language, while staff moved pages around like the order of facts could change their moral content. Nora sat through the briefing, answered questions about chain of custody, and watched the machinery of formal accountability take hold. Grant Holloway would be charged not just with conspiracy and obstruction, but with reckless endangerment, tampering with public records, witness intimidation, and misprision tied to the concealment of critical safety information leading to loss of life. Wes Talcott faced kidnapping, assault, weapons charges, and possible manslaughter exposure depending on how Todd's and Mason's timelines held under grand jury review. Todd would likely flip fully. Martin Keene had already signaled cooperation. Others would follow. Corruption was never as loyal as it sounded at banquets. During a break, Dana handed Nora a draft public summary. "You know they're going to ask whether your office failed by not reopening sooner," she said. "They should ask." Dana studied her for a beat. "Most sheriffs don't volunteer for self-indictment in front of cameras. I'm not volunteering. I'm refusing fairy tales." Dana's mouth moved in what might have been approval. Fair enough. The press conference itself was a blur of lights and loaded questions. Did Nora suspect more arrests? Yes. Had local institutions failed Mason Vick? Yes. Was her husband implicated? Yes. Did she regret not seeing connections earlier? Regret and evidence were different categories, but yes. At one point, a reporter asked whether Bellhaven could recover. Nora answered, without trying to sound inspirational, "Communities don't recover by moving on quickly. They recover by telling the truth, long enough that denial stops being cheaper." It made the evening news. By late afternoon, back at the station, the first wave of retaliation had started. Anonymous messages. One dead raccoon dumped near the staff entrance. Emails accusing her of destroying local jobs, local faith, local heritage, as if corruption were a crop she had burned. Reese read one over her shoulder and snorted. "Always love when criminals speak on behalf of heritage. Heritage is just memory, with better branding," Nora said. "And half this town uses it as a shield." He set another file down. "Laura Vick's here again." Nora straightened. "Send her in." Laura entered holding a manila envelope and wearing the same expression she'd had the day before, contained, alert, emptied of any need to be comforted by strangers. "I found something in Mason's room," she said. "Didn't think it mattered before. Now I do." She handed over the envelope. Inside was a folded flyer from the county youth job fair and, clipped to it, a handwritten note on Booster Club stationery. "Need hard workers for overnight cleanup. Cash. Ask Coach Pike if parents complain. No signature. Mason kept everything, Laura said. He didn't trust verbal promises. Nora looked at the paper. Another small confirming piece. Another ordinary lie made physical. This helps. Laura sat down without being invited, not rudely, just like a woman whose son had paid in full for the right to stop following room etiquette. You know what keeps making me angry? She asked. Everybody's talking like the town got fooled by a few men. But my son came home muddy and quiet for a week. Danny Pike sent flyers through school for odd cash jobs. People knew kids were being used. Maybe not the whole thing, but enough. And they liked not asking. Nora listened because Laura was right. Bellhaven had not been hypnotized. It had participated at the level convenient to each household. What do you want from me? Nora asked. Laura looked out the office window toward the flagpole. Don't let them shrink this into a paperwork scandal. My son was a boy. He was scared and still tried to bring the truth somewhere. Say that part until it's boring. Nora nodded. I will. Laura stood, hesitated, then added, Danny Pike's sister called me this morning. She said he always wanted people to think he was stronger than he was. I told her maybe weakness is what finally made him useful. After she left, Nora wrote 3 lines on a legal pad and underlined them twice. Mason was a child. He tried to tell the truth. Adults made honesty dangerous. She kept the pad on her desk for the rest of the week. The bond hearing the next day was the first time she and Ben had occupied the same formal room since the arrest. He entered in county khakis with his lawyer and looked thinner already, as if once the secrecy left his body, there was less of him to animate. Nora sat with the prosecution team. Uniform, crisp, face unreadable. The hearing itself was procedural. Arguments over risk, cooperation, access, and the Marsh incident reframed in statutory language. But beneath all that law ran the personal current both of them were trying not to acknowledge. When Ben's lawyer emphasized his client's attempts to preserve certain evidence and eventually steer Todd away from violent harm, Nora nearly laughed at the familiar bargain of compromised men. Judge me against the worst thing I almost did not permit. Dana argued effectively for strict conditions, and the judge granted partial bond with home confinement, no unsupervised contact with witnesses, passport surrender, and monitored communication. Not enough for Nora emotionally, probably enough legally. As the courtroom cleared, Ben paused by the rail where he could address her without technically approaching. I didn't ask for sympathy in there, he said quietly. I know. I asked for procedure. That's what men ask for when they've run out of narrative. He absorbed that. You ever think about what we might have been if this place didn't train everyone to keep the wrong secrets? Nora considered the question and hated that some part of her still wanted to answer it tenderly. No, she said, at last. I think about what we were while telling ourselves we were different. He nodded once. No argument. No plea. That, more than anything, made the moment sad. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted his name and hers in the same breath. Bellhaven loved pairing fallen men with the women who refused to fall with them, as if drama needed symmetry. By the weekend, the town had split into visible camps. Yard signs appeared supporting truth and reform on some streets and protect Bellhaven on others. At the diner, people lowered their voices when Nora entered, but did not stop talking. At church, attendance dipped. At school board meetings, parents demanded audits and then complained about how ugly public accountability looked in front of their children. Nora worked 14-hour days through all of it, helping state investigators trace funds, reviewing old dispatch recordings, and reopening ancillary complaints that now suddenly had context. She found herself thinking often of Danny Pike not as martyr, not as hero, but as a weak man who hit the wall of his own conscience too late and then still walked toward danger. That mattered. Not enough, but it mattered. Sunday dinner at Maddie's house arrived under a pale sky, and the smell of roast chicken drifting through an open kitchen window. Nora parked in the driveway and sat for a moment before getting out, feeling the old family reflex rise in her chest. Be useful, be guarded, leave early. Inside, Maddie had set a real table, not fancy, just deliberate. Eli was loading ice into glasses. Cal stood at the stove pretending he wasn't nervous. There were no speeches, just food, passing dishes, the clink of forks, and the strange intimacy of people eating after surviving the same disaster from different angles. About halfway through the meal, Eli looked up and said, "Are we ever going to stop talking about this?" Cal started to answer, but Nora beat him to it. "No," she said, "not for a while. But it won't always feel like you're trapped inside it. One day it'll be something you know happened. Not the only thing in the room." Eli considered that. That sounds fake. Maddie smiled sadly. Most true things do when they happen slowly. After dinner, they moved to the back porch with coffee. The evening light turned the trees copper at the edges, Cal sat beside Nora, elbows on knees. I sold Dad's fishing boat yesterday, he said. Needed to do one thing that wasn't haunted. How'd that feel? Like treason. Then like rent got paid on my sanity, Nora snorted. Reasonable. He glanced at her. You ever gonna leave Bellhaven? The question surprised her because she had asked it privately so many times she forgot other people might see the answer forming. Maybe, she said. Not yet. Because of duty? Partly. She watched Eli in the yard, skipping stones badly at a plastic bucket. Partly because leaving right now would let too many people turn this into a storm that passed through instead of a structure they built. Cal nodded. That sounds like you. That is either a compliment or an indictment. In this family, it's usually both. They sat there long enough for the quiet to stop feeling provisional. It was not forgiveness. It was not repair completed. It was something smaller and more honest. People still willing to remain visible to each other after the lie had been dragged into daylight. The following week brought indictments from the grand jury and the first plea overtures. Todd Garrison's attorney requested a proffer. Martin Keene formally cooperated. 2 lower-level county employees resigned before being asked. Grant Holloway maintained innocence through counsel, claimed political persecution, and quietly sold the public half of his confidence to anyone still buying. But the evidence held. The tape held. The documents held. Mason's notes held. Bellhaven's preferred narrative did not. One rainy afternoon, Laura Vick asked Nora to meet her at the cemetery. Mason's grave sat under a sycamore at the edge of the older section, still ringed with wilted flowers from after the arrest announcements. Laura stood with her hands in her coat pockets, looking at the headstone, as if waiting for it to answer something. I'm thinking of moving, she said, without preamble. My sister's outside Raleigh. Says there's work and schools, and nobody there will tilt their head when I say my last name. Nora stood beside her, rain tapping softly on umbrella fabric. Would that feel like leaving him? Everything feels like leaving him. Laura wiped rain from her cheek, though Nora suspected it wasn't all rain. But staying here feels like being assigned to his death forever. Then go, Nora said. He doesn't need you punished in place. Laura laughed once, sharp and grateful. You really are bad at fake comfort. I've had complaints, Laura sobered. For what it's worth, Sheriff, I know you didn't build this. You just happened to be standing here when it broke. Nora looked down at Mason's name carved in stone and thought of how often people confuse proximity for authorship, blame for timing, salvation for cleanliness. I was standing here before it broke, she said quietly. Just not close enough. Laura did not argue. She simply slipped one hand out of her pocket and squeezed Nora's forearm once before walking back toward her car. That brief human gesture stayed with Nora longer than any public praise did. Months later, when autumn finally pushed summer out of the county and the first hearing dates turned into a real trial calendar, Bellhaven had grown used to living without certain illusions. First Baptist had new trustees. The school district banned off-book student labor arrangements and announced audits no one would have asked for a year earlier. The diner still served the same bad pie, the football team still played on Fridays, and people still lied. But some lies now encountered resistance before they hardened into civic tradition. Nora kept working. Cal kept showing up on Sundays with groceries he pretended were incidental. Eli got his posture back. Maddie applied for a nurse practitioner program. Reese became, if not friendly, then something sturdier than before. And Ben, under strict conditions and awaiting the full weight of what the law would make of him, existed mostly at the edge of Nora's attention, like an old injury that changed weather first and made sense later. The final resolution did not arrive in one grand cinematic rush. It came the way most American justice does when it manages to come at all through testimony, transcripts, plea leverage, corroboration, and long public boredom interrupted by flashes of unbearable truth. Todd testified. Martin testified. Eventually, after losing his immunity strategy, West talked enough to confirm that Danny Pike had been marked as a risk before the stadium shooting, and that Grant never gave direct orders because direct orders were for men without futures to protect. The tape from the river garage played in open court. Laura Vick sat through it without leaving. Nora testified too, not as avenger or symbol, just as the sheriff who followed a chain of concealed evidence from a fieldhouse killing into the civic bloodstream of her county. When verdicts finally came guilty on the major counts for Grant, guilty across the board for Wes, structured cooperation penalties for Todd, lesser but real consequences for others, Bellhaven did not cheer. Towns do not cheer when their own reflection is entered into evidence. They absorb, deny, reinterpret, then slowly, selectively remember. On the evening after sentencing, Nora drove once more to the fenced overlook near Rayner Bridge. The county had begun demolition prep on the damaged span. Orange markers dotted the roadside. Survey crews had left chalk and flags in the grass. The place no longer looked haunted in the old way. It looked administrative, which in America was often the next phase of grief. She stood by the barrier while dusk came down blue over the creek. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maddie. Sunday dinner, no speeches, pie included. Then another from Cal. She means speeches from you. Nora smiled despite herself. The water moved below with the same indifferent patience it had always had. That was the hardest lesson, and maybe the only mercy. Places continue. What changes, if anything changes, is whether the people living beside them choose to keep repeating the old corruption into the next generation. Nora thought of Mason trying to drive truth somewhere safe, of Danny finally breaking under the weight of his own delay, of Dean Mercer hiding evidence badly, fearfully, imperfectly, and still leaving a path, of Eli sleeping again, of Laura choosing not to become a monument to loss, of herself, not clean, not triumphant, but still standing in the job after the town had seen the cost of doing it honestly. The air smelled of cold mud and pine, and far-off salt. She rested both hands on the fence and let herself feel the full, unromantic shape of what remained. Justice had not repaired Bellhaven. It had only removed some of the rot and forced the rest into daylight, where it could no longer masquerade as character. Maybe that was all justice had ever really promised. Behind her, headlights passed on the county road, people going home to kitchens, arguments, homework, television, prayer, laundry, all the ordinary American scenes that continue beside every public scandal. Ahead of her, the creek carried the dimming sky under the broken bridge and out toward wider water. After a while, Nora turned from the barrier, got back in her cruiser, and drove toward home. Not because the story had become simple or clean, but because for the first time in a long while, the truth no longer felt buried under her feet.